and is you the show here. Or that was some down they can stand or that thing to you. You also said the big kitchi, began a chu nation, Timbo Mebas, or do see it, and it is other image by Geshe Chin Mebas, sure, and never is. And the kitchi was in there, kitchi never the name of Mares, sure the kitchi is, tis at the person, Chivi, Yen Mongoyo, as a yen kitty Tibetan and never Mares, or do some danger. And then she was Shina. Never check him out, Chagri was in the Shina, never check him out, and yet you was in Hengo, yes. I get your lingo was not, you will say the lang under the dendronima to your mother. Chesata dignity, not dendrol kiadi, ye kiwi latine, Jesu Tange, and kiwi le savadi, and Kivachima tender the kiwore, and then you give le savine, a latin Kivachima under the king would yes. Or those that in it, the lady in Jesu Tower is, or Yakana Jesu Tower is. Touch about it. Or do some done it in and under the Kavana, I do other. Kanganda so you was a delay, touch and tender might get a tap minute. Tesa delay is other, tender the Kiakuto, Tenek, tender Kiawa to Nana, you, Kana, Garbili the Kipa, and give it a sound or yes. The Saki is some deduction of some dark away the Saya. I give you the Sa setting on the Kasan sugar Nashim, order or Surim Suyata, and the chicken. Nishimba Tsushim Supportun someday, cause some days, Tunju share, and the Molam dos Jenny, namely the essay. That's some by the DDS and show of the Dinishua.
Good afternoon. So this morning, the way of thinking that we spoke about, the way of thinking to cultivate, is firstly recognizing that this precious human rebirth that we've achieved, this life that has such potential, this life that can be used in a way that is truly meaningful, this life is rare because of how difficult it is to achieve, because of the difficulty in accumulating the causes. But moreover, as we specifically looked at this morning, this life is fragile. It is vulnerable. We may have a feeling like we have time, but our death is not only certain, but it's the time of our death is completely unknown. And when our death comes, it's not that we cease to exist. We will immediately take rebirth, and that rebirth can only be in one of two directions, either remaining in the high realms or falling into the low realms. And this isn't a choice that we can decide at the time of our death, I'd like to go here or go there. This is something that our karma dictates. And if our non-virtue predominates and a powerful non-virtuous imprint is the strongest in our continuum and dictates a rebirth in the lower realms, there we will suffer in ways unimaginable. And moreover, our ability to do something about our situation, it ceases due to the intensity of the suffering. Our process of spiritual development ceases. So therefore one must attain a higher rebirth, continue in these higher rebirths. And to do so, one needs to accumulate virtue. And how to do so? We looked at that again this morning. This accumulation of the practices of ethical restraint, of generosity, of patience, joyous perseverance, and prayer.
All right, the day is on the Kazan of the Shea, the Jishobe, Tiwadan, Tiwaya 인생 것도 이번에 별로 없어야 돼. 진짜다 인내에서 채널에서 인생 것도 연구를 해야 돼. 근데 저 벌써 송거에서는 저기 나는 윤이다 우신에 냠는지 참도 검장한 리저로 어디서려다 우시린 바다고 체 인계외신 대소대 안했지. 거로 거자 안디셀이야다 되네게 치워미다 봐. 가서 검야대 뒤수치 송거로 진 가서 된주를 되고 검야다 치워 제일 뒤서라 아니 니체니나 체나 도시는 거 위에서 통과래 안아도 주시 안아도리야다 되네게 남균이다 내가다 되네 샤나 절려야 진행하는 제고요 봐서 내려야 먼저 저나 니메리야 소소 강투도직 아니 이쇼게 되와지야 다양 거다 되와지 삼다디 계시모래 그지다 니메지야 이제 니메지를 잘 먹고 제마도냐 다 니메지를 살지 제도야다 되네야 맞으면은 이니 돈라지야 살지 냠내 도시네 되네 뒤로와 어디네래 언제 양장 양도 가브레레 가르 삼는 것은 나다 잠잠지에도 잠잠 제마들이 샘주 차에 냥아시요 아다티 기디나 제투문데 야기 루마르다지 지금에 선비게 샤세 냥아시요 어디 삼다이 메레 지산다 디링지 제투 사지 님이 지리 살 눈라지리 살 님이 차지 제투나 산이 이제는 약고래섬 소소 아당의 무리 시게 사야다 아직 다과 님이 다과 제모데나 님이 눈라지리 살지 어디 살지 제투디 약고도 무리 이제 되게 안지 기디 제투도 지기나 삼비겠습니다 눈라지리 살지 제투나 다티 약고도 내 무리 지기 내려다 고급라는 딜레마가 제비 지긴 삼비 어두섬다 되게 지모래 아직 아다시라 넘비 약고 제투면도 이네 안지 직제메지민데 판도야말 섬네 디스 말에 다 이미지를 살지 제베는 나오지글이야 처로 숨지다 먹으면 꼴와 근데 로직을 숨겨 주시 담을래요 그와 님들이 니 가브리엘이 이미지를 살이 있고 미안하기로 어dunre 질 제베나된 직도세네 나오지글이야 내 살신 레토로 아도세네 사게 사지 모두 공부전에 뉴스에 소설에도 제 검묘도 안지 검예게 되어도 슉셔서如果 되어가 가서 슉셔에네 먼저 고갑 뒤수지 아 검예 뒤수지 고라요 지전 제에게 돈이기 눈비셔라면나 싫어라투야 말해 주스 뒤서라게 말해 돈이 유축체는 뒤서 가르나라게 돼 어디 라도 디네자도 두르시네 신체화되게 계시모래
The three verses we've looked at thus far, the connection between them should be clear. And this will continue as we work through the text, how one verse builds on what has come before it. So initially, it's imperative one relies on a teacher, someone who can guide one through both giving knowledge and advice, the guidance on how to cultivate that knowledge within. Then we looked at this precious human rebirth, and what makes it so precious, what makes it so meaningful, but that it is impermanent. And then we came to look at what is imperative is to accumulate the correct causes that will lead to ongoing excellent rebirths. So this is how far we've looked thus far at the various stages that one needs to train one's mind in order to attain liberation and enlightenment. So this is part of the great benefit of coming together for a retreat, is that one gets to engage, or one gets to see the entirety of the path in a condensed manner. One can understand where one needs to go and how one needs to travel to come to the desired direction. So the benefit of these days together is we'll cover the entirety of the path in a brief manner and get to see how these training, or what the trainings are, and how they build into each other, how they connect with each other. And just to come to answer further the question from this morning, the approach that we need to take, not just now in relation to answering this question, but throughout our training, needs to be a balanced approach. Where that balance lies will differ from time to time, topic to topic, and individual to individual. There is not a fixed set answer to most things. The approach one needs to take needs to be balanced based on your own intelligence. Your own intelligence looks and determines. So to come specifically to the question, in order to transform our minds, this will come about as quickly as we are able to apply ourselves, but also it will come about as quickly as we apply ourselves skillfully. So there's a lot of variation there in terms of frequency and in terms of skill. And for each individual, you need to determine for yourself what is the frequency to apply myself, and am I doing so skillfully? And wherever you settle on, or whatever answer you settle on, that will be your answer for now. And over time, as impermanence shows and circumstances change, what is balanced will shift. And this is something that one continuously works with, in that there will be times, such as right now, where one can apply oneself, and the expression all day and all night is much easier to fulfill in a literal sense. But there'll be other times such as when you're working and you're fulfilling your responsibilities to your family, when that expression of all day and all night needs to be fulfilled in a different way. So this, what remains balanced will shift, and that's fine. So that there is not a black and white, you do like this and you don't do like that. Each individual needs to look at their circumstances and be very aware these circumstances will change. And we need to therefore be flexible with our approach. So the most skillful way to take expressions such as all day and all night and unceasing, and there'll be others like effort and so forth, is to understand it means do the best that one can. And what is implied even behind doing the best one can is the meaning of being skillful. If one's mind is uptight, pushing oneself, success will be very slow. If one's mind is far too relaxed, success will not come. One needs to be balanced, and that balance shifts depending on many circumstances. So we always need to apply ourselves with some skill. So for some people, depending on their circumstances, all day and all night is something they can do. They have sufficient training by this point that they understand these topics, and they can ensure that whatever they are doing so through the lens of their meditations, their many meditations on ethics, generosity, and so forth. For others, they will ensure there's a little bit of time at the beginning and end of each day, and they'll do this meditation. For others, only once a day. And for others still, it may only be once a week. They look at each individual looks at your circumstances right now and decides, I will do this much. And then one tries to fulfill that, but with using your intelligence, you make adjustments as one goes, recognizing, actually, I want to do more. Or actually, I need to do a little less. This is too much. And that is good. Just be realistic and honest with yourself. And if for those, for example, who say, I can set aside half an hour a week, this really is manageable. You do that with commitment over a year, that's 52 half an hour sessions. That's excellent. At least doing something and doing it in a balanced way, not pushing too hard, not being too overly relaxed, doing it in a balanced way. This way, something will come. It will develop. What's imperative is not to lose the aspiration. And if you know, I'd like to do more, keep that aspiration, keep that wish. When I have the opportunity, I will take it. And now and again, you'll be able to do a bit more. Keep that aspiration alive. But approach the path with a balanced attitude, then success will come.
Yeah, that didn't in my share. Never tempo, ni be so, chasing Chawa Namja, Pongwada. Keso Tata Trooper Jebala, Tado Bada Dimberchi Yulos.
Continuing then in the text, now we come to the fourth verse. Having developed firm certainty in this, please inspire me to be conscientious at all times, abandon even the most minor faults accumulated, and striving to accomplish a complete collection of virtues.
I don't know, I didn't go to me. Diva said, the Chunjo in it, the Chimbo de Jayama, the Chunjo in that, but Jigama Pong, yes, and you covered the Chunjo and that the Chunjo Regayama and Jayachumbo, this Jigama, the Chimbo Pongway, Maze Chunjo in a Pongo, yes, then Gawa Chimbo to go, Maze, Gawa Chunjo in that Dubo, discovered that the Chunjo Jayama and because I'm at Jungo, at the membership. Gawa Chimbo in that Dubo, Gawa Chunjo in it, yes, Chunjo in that. She's not coming to the Dubo, deeper in a deeper to give a never to give up, never Chimbo to get Pongo by Mass and never Chunjo in a Pongo, Chico, but SS. Then you will reach this one.
The essence of this verse is that do not only commit to striving at the big things. When it comes to accumulating virtue, even when there's an opportunity to do something minor, embrace it, do so. Or if you only have a few minutes, take those few minutes and use them well. Do not neglect minor opportunities to accumulate virtue. Embrace them, use them well. And so too with faults. Do not think that, it doesn't matter if I do this, it's not a big deal, it's not important. We need to turn our habituation away completely from non-virtue minor faults do matter and shouldn't be ignored or seen as insignificant. So in brief, the meaning of this verse is we need to strive to accumulate virtue, both minor accomplishments as well as major ones. And so to the faults, turn away from faults entirely, not just big misdeeds.
that's dushin samdana samdusu kimje samda odi tende de lesha sembeji ngaba tembu shingi go ha go ya chili go wa nye de go odi ne samda da de ne ge samda de shini mewan dugo marse de kimje samda shini mewa dugo mewa ma do wa ne ke wa ling go re ni yao du ke wa ne gyu yao de le tin je wo yao du yung go ba ta chu go wa de ne da min le ke wa le de ne ani den re ki tu wa de mi go wa le de ne ma ne ki wa de den de le do sembeji da semlia 타체버 니하바 니에오레스 니네 니에오레스 지자도 신의 주게 삼단의 삼다도 수김제 삼다의 semlia 어때때 레도 sem비다 니하바 니에베실로 용그레서 니하바 니에니해서.
The first line, having developed firm certainty in this. So this refers to what has been presented thus far. In particular, that this precious rebirth we've attained, which presents such an opportunity. This is finite. It is drawing to an end. This opportunity is drawing to an end. Our death is certain. And when death comes, it's not followed by oblivion, but rather our karma previously accumulated will determine our next rebirth. Therefore, I must accumulate virtue. So this then, having gained certainty in this.
나솔에 기르고요 바인사 되네 예비 초 시디 디벨레가 예비 초 되네 예비 차신 초와는 게 보아다서 인드라화다 처먹 컨디션에 차상야 뽕그리 뽕구리에서 뽕구리에서.
Then moreover, having gaining certainty that non-virtue leads to falling in the lower realms, we have to abandon all faults of non-virtue, including minor faults. So from the second, third, and fourth lines, the English and the Tibetan, the translation is quite mixed, so just read through the verse. But having gained certainty in this, faults accumulated, including minor ones, these have to be abandoned.
学学吧那些的，我就另外一种就跟你现在那个前面是别什么当有的，第什么当的我就那个的个就是呢，变得第个赛的，变得俺有个呢，现在吃素学吧的，专业学吧的，人家长把街的，那个俺有个呢，第个赛中国的，那旅游个呢，现在那个现在那个街的，那个古毛贵啊，老说吧，那个团的旅游个呢，第个赛。一个呢，那什么，那老大一起第八赛就我现在那边去三毛块第八赛过的话，两个加两个另外个加完我什么去呢？三毛上的你得靠着两几个刚刚这个什么的那三大的第个一个呢第八赛过的，这三个就学个另外一什么的，现在那个这个没什么个出什所有的第个我所赛的用过嘛，这个过的话，但是我说啥吧，对吧？啥的用过嘛，那个出什所有的。수름수한테 사와서 연구. 사와서 맨날 에냐마 사셔기만 구요로와디 가르쳐거래. 남나 다디 안에 가르소리 차연이 뽀와다세데 다디 뽕구구리 했을 님보도 쉬고는 샤고리 해서래. 제가 님보도 쉬고는 샤제 안에 뽕구리스. 제가 다된 것도 영화 이주디 수름수 다들 수름수요도 내 삼다이도 얘네 아니 제티가 서도 사와디 예방 무시기 맞춰가지 기요 말이지 차신 타와도 스폰거래. 근데 단예마 사샤바다 양 갑리야 직대 디버 사절리 직디바사의 연구로 된선 사차원의 간시오라선디 nembo shukone sha kore sha ji du sme ba so kore he so da ine se ba ne zan ye ma sa gyo di sha di ba sa sar gyo di nembo shukone sha di ba sar do sa ma chu ba ne sa ma chu ba de ne di ba di ngo ma ba ji sa di mi ma su gyo chi ma ma so le ge di ngo ma de ne sa di re so cha jin ta wa ne bo wa da se bo wa se di nga saba dige da yimbe tupshu ko ne sha ko le sha chi me wo so ko es.
The second line in the Tibetan is our third line. So that what we need to do is two things: both accumulate virtue, purify non-virtue. So looking at the situation of abandoning even the most minor faults accumulated. So how to do so? Well, there are two methods to apply, one of which we have already looked at. The non-virtue or faults are accumulated either through physical behavior that's non-virtuous, such as killing, or verbal behavior, such as lying or speaking harshly to others, or through mental non-virtue, for example, thinking in a harmful way towards others. So the non-virtue is accumulated through physical acts, speech, or our way of thinking. So we need to abandon that. And the method for abandoning that is ethical restraint, where we restrain our body to act within the confines of what is ethical, thereby restraining ourselves from accumulating further faults. So too with our speech, restraining our speech within the confines of what's ethical, and thereby restraining from accumulating further verbal, non-virtuous karma. And likewise with our mind, restrain our mind from the afflictions, restrain our mind from non-virtue. So this is how we limit or bring an end to the accumulation of further non-virtue. But there is a second method that needs to be applied as well, because up to making this determination to live ethically, we have accumulated a tremendous amount of non-virtue throughout this and previous lives, and those imprints abide on our continuum. These need to be purified. So therefore, in addition to cultivating ethics and therefore bringing an end to the accumulation of new non-virtue, we need to purify the karmic imprints of past misdeeds which abide on our continuum. And the method for doing so is applying the four opponent powers.
아다 님보 저기 님마 디베 지교다 되는데 님보 또 주거니 샤고를 시도 샤세리 다 님보 또 시세다 저기 당보 삼다나 대삼다나 카시로 시에다 당보 삼다에 가서다스는 아주 님마 디베 지교 되게 파셈이 앞에 제 네 아니까 소리 아디 디미노 샘베기다 베 너르치샤 디미노 샘베 삼로 교베기 하루지 대삼다에 차고를
These four opponent powers all refer to four different minds to cultivate. So they, like with all the trainings, they are mental. So these can be presented in differing orders, but the first we'll look at is that of regret. So one generates a regret through recalling or being mindful of past misdeeds, thinking of things that have been done and generating regret, seeing them as inappropriate because of the harm potentially caused.
네네 녀바 순진비도 사실와 근데 가르쳐 오르스는 다 어다 되니기 녀바디 디레 가소래 다 달라미도 봐서 되니기 아오바나 되니기 녀바세 사오니 지금에 선배게 dom심게 되려.
Then the second is that of restraint, the power of restraint, where for what one regrets, one says that was inappropriate, that was wrong. I'm now not going to do it again. So one makes a determination. I will not do that again. So this is the second power. The first is the power of regret. The second is the power of restraint, or the power of the promise, where one makes a commitment. I will turn away from such non-virtuous behavior.
Yama Tiba Sashaba didn't ya Shaggy Samje, that in me Sosugi, that's Sanji, that Jamia Conscious years and be Mabashi Dilia in Tiba the Shaggy, and be some dash, some daddy, Geneki thing you top checks, and you may Tiba Shasa, you just set up with the thing you top check. There's a dating a deeper dealing with that Yama Sashi, deeper the same dinner Shaggy, and be some dash, and you tell ya, that's some dash Tiba Shaggy, and Allah. 소수기 개와 가르치베 내리다 매니저와이네 지고래 안 소수기 곰로 자주 셈로 곰바이네 곰제나 지고르네 차시나 지고래 and the sugar Monday put Monday can you put that to go. She's the cow cancer, the new top second, is that deeper shy, deeper shy, you put the shy water. She's down board, deeper shape at change at the Norsha assembly. Gahaki, Mom, but that's all in the chicken mess of the Thompson gear. In a young Ringy Julia, the Asagi, Gongway shoes and be that to my shaggy to Batenege. I came to conscious when you shoe did Dundaya, she said, W. the D top chair. I didn't get in a neat up on a shaggy and some did but shaggy says some Dutch in it, as you gave it cartoon, the name of tops, 2 chin, dividing Yama, Diva Sasha, and the Diva the Taru or agent.
The third power is the power of reliance. So this refers to whom one is addressing one's regret and restraint. One would have already imagined or visualized being in the presence of the three jewels. And when one generates regret, one expresses this regret to the three jewels as if the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas were with one, as if you were in their physical presence. One generates regret and confesses past misdeeds to them. And then the second, that was the power of regret, the power of restraint, is to them you make the promise, I will refrain from such behavior again. So this is the third power, the power of reliance, which is one addresses can also be called the power of the basis. So the very basis of one's spiritual training, relying on the three jewels, one makes the commitment to them. What I've done is wrong, but I'm going to turn away from that. Then the final opponent power is that of the antidote. And this is something one will do specifically so as to counteract or purify one's past misdeeds. And this can be any virtuous activity. It can be a meditation, so meditating on a virtuous topic. It can be reciting mantras such as Om Mani Padme Hum. It can be doing something physical, such as making prostrations with a mind of regret. So one can engage then in any antidotal power, something specifically directed to purify past misdeeds. So by relying on these four opponent powers, and again, one can call them to mind in any order, the powers of regret, the power of restraint, the power of reliance, and the power of the antidote. By relying on these four, one can purify past misdeeds.
Under this, 얘는 계속 타다 주발 제발라서 되는 안도 교회 초 가리네 차사직 교회 치중 가리나 차사 강투도 주고 예서 이자다 되네기 저게 교회 주게 되라 대시 쇼에 셰바나진 아주지 아디 요 된지 게 유코미아티에 교회를 되네 교회 코미아 얘네 되게 뭐 뜻이 삼다에 교회를 도신 디바샤 되는지 제지 처부야 안에 지게 안 차체야 안에지 만데부야 안에지 가서 컨트롤이야 안데 메도로 부야 다 연자부야 다 부야부야로 써봐라 안데네기 소수이디 쇼베시 진비냠내자 얘네기 소수이다 디레 아비다 곰로 가르겸나 소수이다 제주셈 곰야 니제 곰야 얘네가 곰 가르 두시는 개와 시산 개요개와의 강투도 제개와디게 탐진의 주고 우리에서 비밀 소차상 주고 제고래서 얘네기 나 얘네기 주고자다 얘네기 주고라야 바시로 소도 관리로서 남녀로 실리고로 남녀 샘치르토는 식제마도가 지금 제가 니네에서 샘디 남녀의 바가지 샘기에서는 제시를 샤제고도 신의 매제고래서 제가 샘道도 받아된 버지道도 바위에 된지 샘 바위에 된 버지 샘 녀모가 쳐서요 공저의 되샤에 녀모서 당신반의 샘 바매 차 제가 샘 바위에 된지 샘 바위에 된 바디 道都是对的南北国的西瓜的，对的南北国的给的呢，什么的保育定过来是，有没有就是当然的怕干些，什么的给予就是下过来是，一下的真细心点些，真把的细心点的什么的，有没有就是把出来的干些，什么给予就是下保育点些，真的给予错，他大概的如果吃上住过来是，住他的给予错，住他的真是住过来是我。
Chink it up, but.
Ingegnerlo said that I mean the party team said you what that
Bucks. So thus far then, in this verse, we've looked at having developed firm certainty in this, and then for us, the third line, abandoning even the most minor faults accumulated, and So then moving now to the third line in the Tibetan, our fourth line. In addition to abandoning past faults accumulated, which is done through both the commitment to ethical restraint and thereby not accumulating further misdeeds, and to engaging through the four opponent powers, the purification of past misdeeds, one then in addition needs to strive to accomplish a complete collection of virtues. Virtue or wholesome karma, this then can be done in any number of ways. So we, for example, engaging in the meditations that we have covered thus far, meditating on the qualities of the spiritual teacher, reflecting on the preciousness of this human rebirth, meditating on death and impermanence. These are all virtuous meditations, and they lead to the accumulation of virtue or merit. One can make offerings. One can, in fact, do the meditation of the four opponent powers just mentioned. This too is an accumulation of virtue. And one can meditate on other topics, love, compassion, wisdom, or the topics that have been covered thus far of ethics, generosity, patience, and enthusiastic perseverance. One can meditate on all of these or any of these. They all serve to be included within collecting virtue or accumulating virtue. Then, moreover, they're moving to the final line in the Tibetan. So for us now, the second line, conscientious at all times. So this term conscientious, this is a virtuous mind so it's like our conscience. This maybe is clearer. It's our conscience that guides us in dependence on what we've studied, what we've learned, of what is appropriate and inappropriate. So our conscience will guide us to know that the afflictions are harmful, as well as, and therefore to serve to protect us from coming under the influence of the afflictions, as well as being distracted. And being distracted can even be being distracted to virtuous thoughts, but one's different from where one is trying to direct one's mind. So if one is meditating on ethics, but one's mind is distracted to generosity, both are virtuous, but one is trying to accomplish the one. So conscientiousness is likened to our conscience, which then guides us to what is inappropriate and appropriate. So this mind, this virtuous mind, is accompanied by two others. They are not mentioned here at all, but they will be implied. And these, the two minds that accompany conscientiousness are vigilance and mindfulness. So these are a group of three that we rely on. Vigilance serves as the guard at the back of our mind, ensuring that our mind stays unafflicted, so the afflictions do not arise. And mindfulness, so mindfulness is the mind, it can be also translated as memory or recollection, that recalls what it is that we are meditating on. So it keeps our mind on the topic and not on the topic. Vigilance notices the distraction from any potential distraction from the topic, and conscientiousness is also in the background as one's conscience to what is inappropriate at this time and what is not inappropriate.
Ana jinji lobse di na Bendigo susugi nimbo tushugone divashaya da Bendigo ane cho tamjene gewi zawa chasang zhuyalia nden shishende nyamne chebalia nji nyamne di yahu jingone di nji lama da sangye konjo sumye jinji labroche esati labroche satsungorwa so de shuhorda.
Just not like this in the English, but each Tibetan verse ends with what we have in this verse in the second line, please inspire me too. So the verse concludes with this. And so what are we being inspired, requesting inspiration for? That we strive to abandon all non-virtue, including the minor non-virtue, not seeing some non-virtues as acceptable, and to accumulate all virtue, not only saying applying ourselves to what we consider greatly virtuous, but all virtue. And to be successful in this, we are also seeking inspiration in the methods to do so, or the the assisting consciousnesses of conscientiousness, vigilance, and mindfulness.
Kewa chima ngansong le ma tarche, ngansong le kewa tar nyawa ida tundu tile kewa tarche. Ane tar tile yaga, yang ngundiyo lada miyu kubwa toya ki hablam ki rimbati ma diri di sheba le. Deja, chezada anzu ki ngundiyo ngansong le kiye yuri mikiwa le tine chungo re, cheza mikiwa le che kiwa ma re sache. Chezada ngansong le tile tarche, dindwa kiye di giwe le tine chungo re, giwe le ane 대신에 대시슈바나세 주주성향나 소바팅가 보디 두시네 제고리 사제 어두시 지자당을 사시비 디베티게 찾아는 가져서 님보 도시고의 샤고레스 디네게 냠네디 교보다 안지 임바지 레로 마차에 단다라 안지 지원미다 와대다 남친님에체 어두시네 인테다 안두신 제고리 사제 다도는 님보디 단단 님보디 가르스네 다기와치만 나소데라 타 먼저 그거 타고 그래. 먼저 그거 토익이 규제라. 냠는 디체호레스 세딩 다 디싱나들이 디체호 디공고레스 나나지리.
In the Lamrim presentation, what we have covered thus far in this text is included in the trainings that are shared with a practitioner of initial capacity. So initial capacity is a practitioner who has the capacity, the genuine capacity to only strive for the initial level of goal, not for the intermediate or the great level. So a practitioner of initial capacity is striving to accumulate the causes that will ensure they do not fall into the lower realms in their very next rebirth, but once again attain an excellent rebirth. And this is the motivation behind their various practices, such as ethical restraint. They are practicing ethical restraint or training their mind in ethics so as to ensure they create the causes to attain an excellent rebirth and not fall into the lower realms. And so too with the other meditations of generosity and so forth. And to become a practitioner of initial capacity, one reflects on this precious human rebirth, this great opportunity that we've achieved, recognize how meaningful it is so that we don't take it as ordinary or commonplace, but recognize this opportunity that this life presents as something of great value. And then to spur us on and not to continue to be lost in distraction. The subsequent meditation is on the impermanence of this opportunity so that we embrace whatever it is that remains of this life. And that then spurs us on through the further recognition that when death comes, one can only fall either to the lower realms or remain in the high realms. Therefore, I must strive to accumulate the causes for a rebirth such as I have attained now. So this is the section we've looked at thus far, the trainings which are shared with a practitioner of initial capacity.
September was a member teaching it 1 is to war that day. She never did. She so little much canal, she town about the names. This was she unit and circular. The nearly Tikang near that's it. Some roche, need a charas. That shed, however, then imagine that and she added. As an good to ship so chasing out the resident. To Chinese Lateral, my ship's order chase, so that didn't answer that. To see Gormans, I didn't talk to the Malish, we made one. I think that they did to use it, and then you wouldn't would buy. I should share it.
What we've covered here now, I think this is our fourth session together, looking at the trainings that are shared with the practitioner of initial capacity. It's just presented in a very abbreviated manner in the short text. For those who have been coming to the weekend teachings on the Lamrim, there we've had 120 sessions and we haven't got this far yet. So there the text presented in great detail. Yeah, we've covered it just fleetingly in just under 4 sessions.
that didn't much that didn't much and I'm doing it that just chunga that they yachert and word yachert daje that garjores no koge dunga ada mi jewalemba the lay on jewalemba the dia dunga yo gangayo hele tar or that tarba togu is that tarba togi lam nyamle that kare is that didn't ma this one.
Now we move into the training shed of the practitioner of intermediate capacity. So this is marked by one's outlook growing in expanse. So the initial training is looking beyond this life to one's next life, not seeing this life as of such great importance, but ensuring our next life goes better or goes well. So one's looking beyond this life. That's the initial training. Now we start to raise our perspective or broaden our perspective, becoming far more far-sighted than merely our next life, and coming to recognize that as long as one is bound in cyclic existence, one will suffer wherever one is born. So thus far, the practitioner is striving to accumulate virtue in order to attain an excellent rebirth. So their perspective is beyond this life, but only to the next. Here we come to recognize that actually I'm in the high realms now, and I am suffering. And those around me, also in the high realms, are suffering. Wherever I'm born in the high realms, I'll continue to suffer. I want to gain liberation from cyclic existence in its entirety. So therefore, one's motivation for accumulating virtue becomes far stronger because one is looking for a greater goal, not only a good rebirth, but actually liberation from cyclic existence. Over the course of your lives, each individual life, you will have engaged in behavior that was fine from a societal point of view, but later you came to recognize actually is harmful, and you stopped it. So sometimes this may be experienced in terms of one's diet, and one recognizes, well, I've really been enjoying this kind of diet, but it's not balanced. I need to moderate what I'm eating. Or perhaps one drinks a bit too much and recognizes this is actually causing me some harm. I need to change this behavior. Or some friendships. Could be good friends, enjoyed many good times, but you come to recognize, actually, I come away from time with these friends and I don't feel so happy inside. We complain a lot or whatever it may be. These friendships aren't so good for me. And then you make some changes. So this is similar to the process here, whereby in the trainings of the practitioner of initial capacity, one looks at the faults of the lower realms and has a great aversion to that, saying, I do not want to suffer there. I want to remain where I am as a human, or perhaps as a god. Now, we look at the state of a human and a god and come to recognize there is not lasting happiness to be found here either. So the first part of the meditation is to recognize the variety of sufferings that are found in the higher realms. So the practitioner thus far has come to recognize that the three lower realms are places of intense suffering, and has given rise to a determination, I do not want to be born there. But the aspiration remains to be born in the higher realms as a human or god. Now we need to focus on the faults there to see that actually there is no existence as a human or god where one experiences lasting happiness. That actually, whatever one's circumstances are as a human, for example, one still will continue to suffer. One cannot escape suffering as long as one is born within the realms of samsara. As long as one has no freedom from this process of uncontrolled rebirth due to our karma, we will, wherever we are born, whatever our circumstances, we will suffer. So the process here is to come to recognize what one previously had thought was pleasurable, actually is not. So we come now to the fifth verse. Experiences that can never satisfy are the door to all suffering. Such pleasures of samsara are unsuitable to place trust in. Knowing these grave consequences, please inspire me so that a fervent striving for liberation's bliss arises.
다 코르기 교인 다시 또 다이르 코르기 교인 시고 통연데 다 코월에 타르고스 비 타르디 삼바께 근데 탈비기 타르바시 탈비 윤대 통용 제사 탈비 윤대 토되는 타바제 토고도 셈비기 타바 되기 삼바께 타바 되기 삼바께를 아 타바 토이게 람들이야 냠내 집바다 장 얘네도 샤진데 타바도 월케세.
So this process has the two aspects of looking at the faults of the higher realms, recognizing there is no lasting happiness here, but recognizing that liberation is possible, liberation from cyclic existence, liberation from suffering. So then one looks at the benefits of attaining liberation, as it's translated in our fourth line, the desire for liberation's bliss. So we want to replace the current desire for rebirth as a human or god for a desire to be reborn, to attain liberation from cyclic existence.
나도 뭐 그런 집이 명음 시대다 집이 명음 봐서 당한 저기 대비 도시네 다 야지 밀이야 예배네 다 도시와도 되는 봐 도삼다도 되는 봐 논치네 제네제 파진의 딜레딜디고 마다 다 딘디 디우 샘표 몸발이고 말했어 배나 집이 명어서 당한도 스페로 샤베나 당한 저기 도로럽시네 근데 한국을 지다만의 지켜 딜레지나 한국 이 지기 야고치는 딜레 야가시고 딜레 니고 숨고 쉬고 다 딜롱랑 미질 한국에는 내 강번 나는 그에가 한국 7월이야 내가 저기 가로 거야 한국 점점조지 가로 한국 제모세미 한국 얘네게 다 지고 니고지 안디안 지금 바지 도스타이드다 안 지게 잡라 나나 지라 지다다 지 그 something 야야 다마 등으로 어디시도 어디야고 디오도 소아에 기니메 지게 that is 도시네 대 롱제네 한국어를 마선 둘러를 마선 얘네 제네 롱제네 뭐만 매바다 디고 에 매바디 도시네 되바 기고레스 되바 기고레스 어디나시 칼라에 루시네 다 칼라 직선 어디사고 스비디니 되바 뭐면 매바 칼라 세게 되바 직심을 자 딜레사 되네시 안도스와 디나시 당한주 캠자로 나 사지디로 다 저건 지소사범에 어디 제마디로 딜레 기우도 제로 뭐마이기네 매바 제사 당한주 데베 연대디게 안 소소리아 안지기 규절할 마선에 뭐라로 잡고 지규나 안데 지게야고 오스라전 딜레 야가지고 무슨 삼마다 되네 아직 가리네 다 위로 지나 되었으나 네 딜레마 고스 왕시로 지나다 안지게 왕지 되서는 어디디 제마 왕지 체리고 딜레 왕체 되네도 쓰는 지고래 제사다 아지게 데비기 뒤엔데야 두스 왕체네 몸이야 유네메데 직지고 좋아하면 먹고 되게 차고 예제래 예제비 명엄.
Looking at the start of the fifth line, or the first half of the fifth line, the first line, experiences that can never satisfy. So this is a rich area of self-deception, not just self-deception, but communal deception, that the various experiences that we chase after, looking for various pleasures, they always leave us dissatisfied. Or to express it slightly differently, the pleasure we experience never lasts. So all these things we chase after them because we expect some pleasure as the reward of gaining what it is we desire. And whilst sometimes we experience some pleasure, sometimes not even that, it never lasts. And from it not lasting, we immediately desire something new. And in this way, we continue to run after a variety of pleasures, and this is exhausting because it never ends. We are never satisfied. It is never enough. Of all the various things and classes that one runs after, one never reaches that point of saying, I'm satisfied. This is now enough. I'm content. This is unknown to us. If you look at your cupboards at home, the number of shoes and outfits and so forth, is superfluous to one's needs. The number of pairs of shoes and the outfits that one has. And whilst one certainly can justify, I need this for that activity and that for that activity, we hardly need the full array of what we have. And how often have we desired something, we've seen it, it looks wonderful, we can imagine ourselves being seen in it, we buy it, maybe we never even wear it. So this we have tremendous experience of. We think of another area that is so clear is that of food. We're very drawn to delicious food. We think of the disappointment when a meal doesn't live up to our expectations, whether we've cooked it ourselves or we've gone out and paid. The dissatisfaction of it not fulfilling our hopes. And also, what happens whilst we are enjoying a delicious meal is we are very soon, whilst we are still eating, we are thinking about the next experience. We'll think about when can I have this again? What will I have immediately after for dessert? And in fact, if we're in a restaurant we don't know well, we may call for the menu to choose for next time. Never satisfied. We go on holiday, and perhaps before the plane even lands, we're planning our next trip. It's never enough. It's never enough. And then there are also the less obvious, but sometimes even more powerful ways, more deceptive ways. For example, if we have some power and influence, this can be very addictive. Wanting to grasp and hold on to this power and influence that we have over others, or it can be expressed also as prestige. This can never be satisfied either. So this needs to be looked at, how these experiences can never satisfy. These are, and it comes to the next slide. So these experiences can never satisfy. And this exhausts us, running after experience after experience.
Samlo deva zoya me ngomye me chokshe me ji ores ta dine kena di samlo di ta kars samlo ta di karres ne go ku yu kores ta de la tin dunga pa me ba es sa ka che sa dine samta dine di yung ores.
This needs to be reflected on well, so that one gains a sense of exhaustion, running around chasing this these never-ending experiences that never satisfy us, never leave us content. But then there's a second part of the meditation, which points to the faults of this deception. We see it at the end of the first line. Are the doors to all suffering. So altogether, experiences that can never satisfy are the door to all suffering.
제자다 동하고 유고래서 되다 이 되네게 되충 가서 처음 시해봐 되네게 정보면에 되바로 시켜요. 돼. 되게 동하 빠트면 그래서 되 등용으로와 제자 되네에서다 되네게 주위에 된다리야다 디 되게 조금은 선배이 된다리야가 빨리 먹고 자고야. 안 되네게 지 되나디 마주비 동하 두 마주나 주마서세 셈테 제자다 소식이 되나지 예제베나다 디마 지 말라도 세쇼로 세를 니고를 왕치로 제다 왕치 충조서 삼삼 다치 소식이 여바데 유로시나 안용조서 세비니 뼈뼈로 선배 되네게 동아 제자다 저 도르도 쉬셔반데 되네게 망음바게요도 디 견체네 데비 된기 아 두개게 된다리야 갈래몽고 야고야 데비 된데 마주비 동아 근데 데비게 된데 대 안에 소식이 주되어 이런 대단 자유의 동아 어두신 동아 빠트면 가지고 그리 에세데 제자다 이 제자 되네게 요아디다 삼도 따야디 맞아 동아 뭐 요아야게 거로도 시를 마선 되네 삼다나 될 텐데 요아래 에세데
다든지간다
안스기 답을 동아 꾸유 고셔야 돼 동아 꾸유 고임비 금전데 되네 삼다다 두스tamores.
So this part of the reflection is to recognize that the end point of all these endeavors that we engage in, the work we do, the hopes that we have, everything that we've achieved, all these experiences that we have that in the end never satisfy us, all that effort we put into that, not only does it not lead to us being satisfied or content, but we end up accumulating a lot of non-virtue. And in this way, they are following these desires is the doorway to all suffering. For example, if one is really desperate for a particular pleasure, one will quite easily push others aside to get it for yourself. Or one will prioritize the fulfillment of one's own needs and not be there for a friend who perhaps needs your company. And even when we do achieve things, we have something new, something beautiful. From this, our afflictions can so easily grow. A sense of pride. Look how successful I am. Look at these possessions that I have. But not only pride, jealousy towards others, competitiveness towards others. So to gain these unsatisfactory experiences, we have to encounter many problems and difficulties. But not only that, our afflictions grow. Afflictions such as competitiveness, jealousy, pride, as well as then the expression of our attachment and anger when our attachment is unfulfilled. So these 2 points of how the various experiences that we strive for have never and can never satisfy us, and that they are the door to all suffering, these need to be reflected on well.
Isa denege samlo roshi jike ngom sheba dene de lia dene chane chabe ngom sheba shidu ade dunga kunyu gore sede da chesan du shongore stanga de biese de sha sheba na zengli na le ma shu yan chesan dene rwa sang ngom sheba so sui je hab de yer de dile an jike 사실 맞서 개체고 또 딩아 와실에 맞서 체고 선배 지다데 되는 마야데 내거로 와 알아가면 뭐 쓰지 얘네가 지금 거의를 느견데 되는 거라 제대로 하던 지구요데 다 딜레마 딜레 야고 내가 뭐 진행은 거의를 내다 나한테게 지금 와실 맞서나 와실 지게는 딜레 와쳐도 와체도 유리가 심고도 이제 나 와치는 알린 거 선배 삼게데 얘네 미마야 고할 따야다 왕예 셰야다 근데 지게 되수와 얘네 변주로 신나디 배지 고에다 딜레마 고 심삼다 고서 리선 체야 얘네게 배 도시네 용거로 와 얘네 자다 지수 차사 삼리 토네 왕 미시바스 딜레디 디고 좀 약간은 당가 와치도 쇼서를 선배 섬다다 쇼저서 삼제 다디야 디토네 마셔게 된다리야 아니 지금 미망 고할다 그리스당 고도 마자고도 투어자고 용자랑고도 가르나 지금 제고도 가르치는 또 섬다는 용자 슈티고 제가 이내기 제비 명원비기 뒤에라 제바친 주네 다 명원버 섬는 디기 랑셰 랑이야 강아 또면 요 마세 샤야 강아테 랑셰니가 동아야 그 유티 사용으로 하지 제가 디네자 동아 꾸이고 어서제 섬다도 신에 섬다베는 아주 섬도세 다베는 라트바도 쉬운 거 같다 되네.
This really is a rich area for reflection and needs to be reflected on deeply so that all that we have desired and feel drawn towards and wanting to have, we come to recognize actually that only harms. I must rather leave it aside, and we start to feel more of a repulsion towards what previously had drawn us in. To reach that point takes a lot of reflection from many different angles. So look at your own lived experience and look at what you observe in the world to see how true this is. If you think of any instance of conflict that you've experienced yourself or friends you know have experienced, or that you see in our world, it comes down to someone wanting something and wanting it no matter the costs. So this is clearest where there's conflict between nations, where there's warfare, that the political leader decides that they want whatever their neighbor has, and they have the right to that more so than the neighbor. They have power, they have influence, and they can manipulate, and therefore they can start engage in warfare. But it's not just devious political leaders. But if we take those in business, wanting to gain a profit and thereby to self-enrichment, but also in terms of then the prestige of their company growing by great percentages every year, and them having more power as their company grows, that kind of wish is not dissimilar from wishes that we have. But those who have more power, such as leaders or business, from this, they will readily do things that otherwise they would recognize as wrong. For example, destroying the environment. They will destroy the environment knowingly, but have many reasons to justify it to themselves, their board, their family. Similarly to those who have power. And here it's most obvious with political leaders, but wherever people have power of any sort, if they want to hold on to that, this will lead to further non-virtuous behavior, lying, deceiving, etc., maybe violence. And if you look at instances in the world of corruption, it's all too often the wealthy are involved, either giving bribes or receiving bribes. They're already very rich, but it's not enough. They are not satisfied. They are not content with what they have. And we look from the outside and it seems remarkable. We need to look for those same expressions of that way of thinking within our own life. We need to come to recognize that from these desires, wanting this or that, it leads to a habituation or strengthening of a way of thinking. That way of thinking leads to only problems, suffering, and difficulties for ourselves and for others. This is what needs to be recognized. Not so much the activity itself, but that motivating mind behind it. That motivating mind is what leads to harm. It is this desire and then the acting out on that desire that leads to the harm. Harm for oneself and harm for others.
다데네 이데 미룬 시비 폰조기 예미르네스 지르다 제자당 저기 시비 폰조 코위기 최 폰조 가네시네 약고 직디네 가네네 진ing보 가요 말레스 이때 이데요 말 딱와 띠부요 말레스 이데 미룬 그래서 내가 대시 쇼이셰바나시 저기 가서 지나 저기 유이다 소다가 특기지기 지교와에 도신 즉 님바샤 교와도 즉 제가 그 딱과 띠부 되고 말레스 디나시 저기 롱죄로 치네 아 이제这个 롱아마를 롱죄야고에 나 다들 매와 차로 니 쇼게 야고에다 광달을 매와 차로야 우신에 저기 즉 예바데 딱과 띠부기 디나 예바 띠부 차야 말스 제대로 우신 매와 차로 제대로 가서 자라로 당보이도 사버쇼 얘는 님바샤다 가슴질이야 매와 차로 제대로 이 대시배 절로 되고 줘야 가야 말스 그냥 저 코리우로 지내 남사 다른 남시하고도 쓰다 남사 야직 교제 야선 차와래 남시하고 매차야 근데 다들 중앙지 마트고 이거를 탑적고래 사염 자야야다 얘네 출로 자야야다 얘네 강도 제자다 문코비기 폰조들이야 다디 제샤다 거리 다 주와메 버팀부 제샤 선배가 가야요 말레스 제사 좀 이때에서 루대기 루대 쳐야기 얘네 가야요 말레스 이데미로 제사 시비 폰조기 제사 얘네게 시비 콘조 코와들 루 시비기 대비기 연된 되네 삼다다 시비 코리기다 폰체 야보당아도 야보지야 다가도 야가도 가리네 차살야 닝보 가야 말레스 도신 유어줘야 맞다고 미템바 유어줘야 지도되게 지레스 제가 내내 잠 도신의 삼다들 얘는 예믹되게 통보해서 예믹식내에서 되는 예믹되다 거기 분석에 삼다 노출의 집이 명원박이 예믹 노출 유대바이나 될 다보 템부 매바 안지 이 때는 미루게다 예믹될 때는 루아민도와 선배게다 도신의 연되게 통용을 해서
Continuing in the verse, such pleasures of samsara are unsuitable to place one's trust in. So this expression, pleasures of samsara, is very broad, as it should be, because what we are drawn to is very broad. We're drawn to things that we see, that we hear, that we can touch, and so forth, as well as thoughts, pleasurable thoughts. We are drawn in all directions. And we are drawn continuously, wanting this, wanting that. But we need to come to recognize that none of them can satiate us, can satisfy us. And this is because they have no essence, in other words, no real value. And this is because they are not stable, they are not reliable. And this can be understood in the same way that this body is not reliable, that it is in the process of decline and decay, so too with all our valued possessions, for example, or the enjoyable experiences that we have. They are impermanent. They will fade away and disappear. People can be poor, gain a great wealth, and lose that wealth. A family member that becomes very wealthy, their children or their grandchildren may squander it all. One's prized possession may be stolen, may break. And then you think of whatever you buy that you take great pride in. It's something that looks lovely, or you've longed for it for a long time. Where does it end up? Eventually, it goes into the bin like everything else. There's no pleasure in samsara that can satisfy us, because they do not last. When we're enjoying lovely weather because we like the heat, or we prefer the cool and we're skiing, or we like it when it's somewhere in between, like today, whatever it may be, it doesn't last. And if we observe a natural disaster, whether floods or fires, we think of the people living in those affected communities, a week or a month before it happened, just going about their life, oblivious as to what was about to befall their community. And this is just the natural way of things. Whatever has come about in dependence on contaminated causes is a something of samsara. And therefore, it is all these pleasures of samsara are not reliable. They are not stable, and they can never satisfy us. So now the third line. This is something that we have to recognize. We have to understand these grave consequences. And the grave consequences is in particular what you see in the second line, placing our trust in these. And placing our trust means thinking that following our desires will lead to a happiness that is worthwhile, when actually all that it really leads to is compounding our self-delusion, our self-deception.
Tarbase tobudu sembige taba dunye samashli gore eje. Eza dene eza taba dunye denege rini dene yebi rine tarbe dewala dunye chenpo gewar jinyu losa tarbe taba dunye yu dunbati gi gore eje la chiza. Denege ni gyun tongdo a gyun dele tongdo ada lada mili gewa de dene gyun duwa sembe gyun tongdo da denege koala gi shinjila gangare chiza koala dele tarkudu sembige tarne agar고선 탈바세 톱구두 샘비기 동예기 뒷바디 되기리 해서 제가 예미리네 나 귀인데 하고니 하나 갈리게선 탈베 대화라 이 탈베 대화세야 되는 게디네 대화는 대화마다 비워티 동아 싸우기는 안 매발에 지사에서 니네게 탈베 대화디 톱구두 샘비기 동예 뒷바디기 해서 탈베 대화를 뒤에 셈보스
Reflecting well on these first three lines, in particular in relation to oneself, recognizing the futility of how we've lived our lives up to this point, of being dazzled by all that is shiny and new and seems to come with a promise of happiness, but never being satisfied, always discontent, unhappy. Thinking well about this leads to a wish to be freed from this. Freed in particular from these minds of desire, yearning for this, yearning for that, and once again being disappointed. So the outcome to come to then is the fourth line. So I'll read the second half of it first. To come to a yearning for liberation's bliss. So bliss, or maybe happiness here, it's the same word, would be better, in that one recognizing that we have never experienced a moment of happiness that is worthwhile, moments of happiness that is lasting or stable, ever, not in this life or any previous life, never once. Every moment of pleasure or happiness we've experienced has faded away and left us yearning for something else, unsatisfied. Then thinking well on this will give rise to a yearning for happiness that is lasting and stable. That is the happiness of liberation. One is liberated or free from samsara. One's mind then is never afflicted and abides in lasting, stable happiness. So here one then gives rise for request, inspiration, so that a fervent striving for liberation's bliss arises.
야네 토구도 선배 삼로 야네 기고레스 얘네게 제제 얘네게 개념은 제발이야 니 야포줘야 된다라 라마 이담 as 상예는 비치일라 시에세데 이때야 아니 소득셔야 차원임.
What is required to be done here in this verse is really challenging because we are pushing against lifetimes of habituation, lifetimes of striving after this pleasure and that pleasure, things that we can see or smell or taste or touch or just thoughts, things we enjoy thinking about. All of this, recognizing that it's deceiving us. All of it, that this way of thinking deludes us. So to break this habituation requires regular meditation, cultivating this wish for the bliss of liberation again and again. And this is difficult to actually achieve. Therefore, the verse ends with, please inspire me to do so. To just speak briefly about what is meant by liberation. So liberation, which is what this verse leads us to, giving rise to a yearning to achieve, is being liberated from the afflictions. Not temporarily, but permanently, completely. And to do this, the afflictions are what need to be eradicated. But afflictions need to be eradicated to the point that they can never arise. Only then is one liberated. So that means one needs to eradicate the afflictions as well as the seeds of the afflictions, because it's from the seeds that the afflictions arise. So it's not merely reducing or temporarily suppressing the afflictions, but eradicating their seeds so they can never arise. So this is the attainment of liberation. And where do the afflictions arise? In our mind. Where do the seeds of the afflictions abide? On our mind. So it's eradicating the afflictions together with their seeds from our own mind is the yearning that, or the determination that we give rise to in order to attain the bliss of liberation. And to bring this about, one has to meditate deeply on the faults of samsara. That has to be done to give rise to the determination to gain the bliss of liberation.
지사 디수 용한 디 소소 뒤에서기 개합되다 강 망보시 토다 티강 딜레드 마탄나 탐민 타고도 세비 삼다이도다 딜레 타예게 탑람디 야가디 가와두스네 다 예가 어도스레도 하신 빼고서 스비 피 소소기 뒤에서 개합되다 실리 개합미도 연된지도 어슬레디 연된체야 강아 충와 안지기 탑람 야가를 통하시네 지사 디네기 제네는 고 개합샤나네 소소 투용보로와 지사다 The Australian media Chile to hunting New York, is also captured. Hasn't so you have the Gensha Tongo, Madile, and then Chua Tong Mesa to go much as I did as a down to Saruchina. Tachi, so you do a Satilia Canada, Beji Canada, Mango Tondu, the other that Tane, she had Shanaj Burden, Canada said was the negative tablet of Puro. Dina she, that to do a set the Kawayosan, Devi comes at the day, rented. Devi come some said that Suka de come sume come said Sumanduka Devi come said. Chizada dinale, Yora Mamboka, oh, just Tongo or what the Benes. Chidan say to Yakanga, Ye Naza Ganga, and the Chigi, or Yako Ji Chong to be the Nigatona Ganga, Dine, and the Mipenji, Ajik, Samba Timbi Tona Ganga, then Ajik Niganga Mango, those Toyo. Chizada Gangan did the Targo, the dead tarbet, Harrison, Gangan did the Tarbana, 코어들을 탈바스에 요레스 탈바 투 탈바 톰난 강한 균이 요 말레스 자 탈비기 도시네 젠자 탈바도 이 삼바디 기워야 도 샤워를 제자다 니네기 더는 인보디 당한주 대비기 엔덴델야 그리고 분조리야 균다 델레 털드가 삼바기리 털드가 삼바기데 아니 가리리기선 탈바사 통일 등이 좀 바기리에스 나보 그리고 분조리 균다 얘네 델레 탈바스 토부도 선배 삼보디 기지나디 야네야도 기억을 세 삼당 에서다디 더는 인보디
Australia is a country largely of immigrants. Probably the vast majority of us here, either ourselves or our parents or our grandparents, at one point moved here. For them to move here, they would have had a reason. And that reason would have been they had heard about Australia, or in modern times they would have seen Australia on their screens, and they would have seen, it looks like it's a country where I can have a better life than where I am. And then they would have gone through some effort to do whatever it was required at that time to move here. So to emigrate from one country to another, it takes a strong motivation because it's quite an effort, especially if you have a family. And to make such an effort, one needs many good reasons. So this is the similar process to what is being presented in the Dharma. If we want to change our way of thinking, we need a motivation to do so. For a motivation to be lasting, it needs to be based on reasons. The stronger the reasons and the more reasons there are, the stronger the resulting motivation will be, and the more sustained that motivation will be. So any life goal that you set yourself on requires a strong motivation, in particular, if it's one that will take time to accumulate. It's not just the goal to cook supper tonight, but something that one sets for oneself over years. It requires a strong motivation. And that motivation needs to have come about in dependence on many reasons. Otherwise, it will not be strong enough to lead to the goal. So the reflections in the first three lines here lead us to come to recognize the actual reality of the desire realm that we live in, that it is pervaded by problems. There is no lasting happiness to be experienced within the desire realm. There is not a single person or single being anywhere that is experiencing lasting happiness who is born due to contaminated karma and afflictions. Not one, and there never has been. And when we think about the problems in our world and in our lives, it's innumerable. So even today in this country, some people have food insecurity. They're struggling to feed their families. Luckily, we don't have a water problem here, but other countries, they have problems with having access to clean water. Much of the world, there's environmental degradation, and that is causing ever more problems. And then conflict is a problem facing everyone, interpersonal conflict or between communities, and in some instances between nations. We recognize this. This body too that we value so. Even if we are in the best of health or in the prime of youth, this body is not stable. Disease will come. So recognizing that there really is no one and nowhere that is a place of lasting happiness, but that something is possible if we gain liberation or freedom from this desire realm. Recognizing that that is possible and is achievable for every one of us. Recognizing this clearly leads to a fervent striving for liberation's bliss, wanting to gain freedom from the suffering realms of samsara. To do so requires extensive reasoning. And extensive reasoning means looking from many angles over an extensive period, continuously coming to recognize there's nothing worth striving for. It's all going to let me down in the end. And every time I strive for something that has no real value, it just strengthens my self-deception. I need to let go of this and strive for what has value. So on that point, we can conclude for this afternoon. but there's still a few minutes. So if there are questions, then please feel free to ask.
Hang in there too.
Then thank you. Oh, then thank you, and we'll see you again tomorrow.